I want people to stop saying tekai in ancient Greek. What do I mean by that? I'll explain. What are these words? Te and kai, well, both of them mean and. Kai is the word for and, the most basic word for and te, well, what is this te? Te is cognate with the Latin word que and the Sanskrit word cha. All of them have a common origin in the reconstructed word in Proto-Indo-European, which is que, just like Latin. Well, how does it work in the oldest attested of these three? Nara naryascha, which means men and women, just like Latin. Viri feminaeque. And in ancient Greek, we can do the same thing if we do something a little bit more poetic or pre-classical, which is to say, Andres gynaikeste. Exactly the same as viri feminaeque, exactly the same as nara naryascha. Nara naryascha, viri feminaeque, Andres gynaikeste. Except that in the Greek, that's something you could find a lot in poetry and epic for sure, occasionally in prose that wants to sound poetical. But in the normal prose, we usually get te and kai together. Now already we see a big difference, especially between the Latin and the Greek, which is that in Latin, this word que is jammed right on to the end of the word, and the te in the Greek is not. There's a little space. Well, what's going on? This is just an orthographic convention, because the word in both languages, que and te, have exactly the same meaning, which is to mean and they are both enclitics. Well, what is an enclitic? Well, an enclitic, from the word klinen, there are clitics like proclitics and enclitics, and these are words that klinen, that lean onto the word that they're next to. Enclitics are suffixed, if you will, to the word that come after, and proclitics come before. In English, for example, to say the man and the woman. The man, that word the, is really a sort of a proclitic. Well, what does this mean? It means that in the language, if the language has some kind of lexical stress, meaning there's a word accent, whether it's pitch or stress, in English it's a stress accent. If I say the man, the doesn't have any accent of its own. We can see that because the vowel is reduced from the. That's its full form. But we hardly ever say the. We would say the man. And then we're making the a full word, and we're giving it a special kind of an accent on its own. And it's no longer a proclitic. It's no longer totally parasitically dependent on the word that follows it. Similarly, the word que in viri feminaeque. It's not really a word in its own right, and this particular word actually can't ever stand on its own. And for that reason, in the conventions of writing Latin, we always write it together. Viri feminaeque. Although, interestingly, we know one of the most famous que ever used is Senatus Populusque Romanus. And it's written SBQR. It almost seems like that Q should be a whole big important word on its own. And then when we learn enough about Latin, we realize that, oh, this que is not actually very important at all. It's just this little thing that we're joining on to it. So it's kind of funny to see it given this full word status in the writing. But this really has mostly to do with orthographic conventions and how those orthographic conventions, how the written word really affects our understanding of the language. And it can create some misunderstandings in that way. So, que, not really a word on its own. And the same with te. It's just an enclitic. It's parasitically dependent on the word that it comes after. So what's the problem with tekai exactly? Well, let's take the first time tekai occurs in one of the most famous textbooks for learning ancient Greek, which is Athenase. And that happens in chapter 3, part 2. That's what the beta stands for. It's 2, not beta. In part 2, and the line is Piripos estin o tu dikaio politos huios, pais megaste kai Andreos. And so that line, pais megaste kai Andreos. What's wrong with that? What is there an issue here? Is tekai wrong? Well, no, of course, this is a perfectly nice sentence in ancient Greek. Pais megaste kai Andreos. A nice little phrase. It means that Philip is both a big and strong boy. Pais megaste kai Andreos. In the archaic Greek way, we would say pais megas Andreoste, which looks like the Latin equivalent of this, which would be puer magnus fortisque. So what is this really for? Why couldn't we just say kai? Pais megas kai Andreos. We could. What is the te doing? Or the tekai combination? Well, it's making it a little bit stronger. It's joining the two adjectives here a little bit more closely together. It's putting a little bit more emphasis on the combination. That's all it does. So when people think, oh, te kai is a stronger version of kai, they start to use it incorrectly. How would they use it incorrectly? Something like this. Pais megas te kai Andreos. Ooh, that is wrong. Wasn't that the exact same thing I said before? No, the pause was totally wrong. An utterance, meaning after a pause, cannot ever begin with an enclitic. Why? Because an enclitic follows another word. Most of the enclitics in ancient Greek, and there are a lot of them, are the second word in a phrase for this exact reason, because they cannot be the first thing in the phrase, even if they're a conjunction, like te. So you can't say te kai Andreos. That is bad ancient Greek. It's incorrect. It doesn't make sense. It's like starting an English sentence with to. So take an English equivalent of this, more or less. Philip is a big boy and strong too. To say te kai Andreos is the equivalent of saying too strong. Doesn't make any sense. Too strong means he's too strong. Strong too means also strong, right? So the position is very important, especially in the utterance. So Philip is a big and strong boy too. That works just fine, doesn't it? Hi, Blue Jay. The Blue Jays are joining us for this video. So this is what everybody ends up doing wrong. Why does this happen? Why do people end up saying te kai Andreos, te kai psychron, te kai hugron, or whatever? They're saying these things. They're beginning utterances, phrases with te kai, maybe in the middle of their speaking, and it's totally incorrect. And why are they doing that? They're doing that probably for two reasons. One, they're imitating other people that they've heard speaking ancient Greek. Even people who speak ancient Greek well can make this mistake. And it's probably mostly just a mistake of repetition. The other reason that people may be making this mistake is because the writing doesn't make it super clear. The fact that in our texts, the enclitic is not written as part of the same word, it's not obvious that if there should be a pause in the line, it would have to be after the te and not before it, especially because it's this little word. But enclitics simply cannot be divided from the thing that they're attached to. It's written as two separate words by orthographic convention in ancient Greek, but it's really one word, megaste, kai Andreos. And that is the right way to recite it, often with a pause. Megaste, kai Andreos. So whenever there's te and kai, you should put a pause there most of the time. Now, you might be like, well, there was no tape recorders back then. How could we possibly prove that the ancient Greeks would have paused between te and kai? Maybe you can accept, okay, I can't just, start a phrase with te kai because te is an enclitic and it's not a proclitic, so it's not leaning forward onto the kai. That's impossible. It's grammatically, phonetically, phonologically, semantically, syntactically cannot work. It's impossible to start a phrase with te kai. That can't happen. You can only end a part of an utterance with te, maybe, and then you have a pause, and then you can start another with kai. So, but how will we possibly know that? Well, we actually have a wonderful source. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about poetry, specifically about tragedy and comedy. Now, the first thing to mention is something called the caesura, which in ancient Greek is tome, the part where the line is cut. Cut how? Well, we'll see. Great book, by the way, on the meter of Latin and Greek poetry. Nice, simple little handbook. So what is a caesura? The place where a word ending is expected is called caesura. Latin for tome means cutting, a caesura. If the break occurs within the limits of a metron, and a diaeresis, the hieresis, if the break occurs between two metra. What is a metron? Well, if you take dactylic hexameter, which a lot of people know and know something about, and I have videos about it if you want to go see them, like in a dactyl, that is the metron in dactylic hexameter, and there's 6 of them, and long, short, short, that's the whole metron. Long, short, short, long, short, short. So if you have long, and then there's a caesura, meaning a word break, a word ends, and then another word begins with 2 shorts, that is a form of caesura. And a lot of lines of poetry actually require that there be a caesura, or maybe a diaeresis, or something like that. And there are different rules, and it depends on the genre of poetry. But we can isolate this down. Let's talk about iambic trimeter. So iambic trimeter is the meter of tragedy and also comedy, for the most part, especially the dialogue scenes. The meter that's most akin to speech. And its rhythm is da-da, 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 da-da. That is, you have 2 iambs put together, da-da, da-da, and that's considered 1 metron. And then you have 3 of those pairings together, and that's why it's trimeter. So it's technically twice iamb trimeter. Iambic trimeter. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Now, in iambic trimeter, where do the caesuras occur? Where are there word breaks? And what is so significant about them? Well, what's significant is that in iambic trimeter, particularly in tragedy, there is a rule that there needs to be some kind of caesura where we expect there to at least be the possibility of a verbal pause, a natural pause. Often this is where the punctuation comes in. In fact, most of the punctuation you see in poetry is at caesuras or diareses. They're at word breaks in places where it's very, very frequent for there to be this little pause, and poets put in these caesuras and these diareses in specific ways in order to add an additional layer of rhythm and beauty to what they're doing. So where does the caesura normally happen in the iambic trimeter line? It normally happens after the fifth element after the fifth element in the line of iambic trimeter. Well, what is that? Well, here's the structure of iambic trimeter. The little X means anceps, which means dual-headed. It could be either short or long, and there's some other replacements that are possible in this system. But after the fifth element, usually it's going to be after 5 syllables, there will be the caesura. And that is called the penthemimeral pentamimeres, which means after the 5th part, after the 5th thing or element in the line. There's also the hepthemimeral, which is after the 7th. That one's also reasonably common, but the penthemimeral, super common, and the majority of lines of iambic trimeter have that. So, an example from Sophocles' Philoctetes, line 664. Monos de dokas, hoskton oitaia niden. There's a comma that's written right there in the text, and that comma, of course, is put there because it's a logical pause, and also because that's the penthemimeral position. That's the penthemimeral caesura. It's a word break in the middle of a metron. It is absolutely a caesura. It is in that position. That's probably where a little pause could go. Now, it's up to the performer. I can't imagine what ancient performers did if they always followed every single caesura. Sometimes they ran through them, not pausing at all. But you can pause there. And prescriptively, the rule, which is seldom broken in tragedy, there has to be a caesura somewhere where there's going to be a little pause, and most of the time it's penthemimeral. That means that we can test te kai. If one is supposed to pause after te, at least some of the time, that means that what if we found te kai in Attic tragedy or even comedy, and it's straddling the penthemimeral position? Well, there are a lot of these. In fact, I searched TLG and I found over 350 instances of te kai in all of Attic tragedy and comedy. There are 4 Attic playwrights whose works have been preserved to completion. They are Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, those are the tragedians, and one comedian, Aristophanes. Let's start with the tragedian. So, okay, Aeschylus, Agamemnon, line 618. E nos timoste, kai se so menos palin. And there it is, right at the penthemimeral position. It's the penthemimeral caesura. And there's no other place where a pause could even really happen in this line. So assuming the prescriptive rule that there ought to be a caesura somewhere, and there almost always is, and that caesura usually is where there's a teeny little pause. Maybe you could run through it, but if you're going to pause, that's where you'd pause, and there it is. E nos timoste, kai se so menos palin. Right there, right where we'd expect it. Here's an example from Sophocles, from Oidipus Tyrannos, Oedipus Rex, line 929. Alolbiate, caexun olbioi sae. Alolbiate, caexun olbioi sae. And you have to pause somewhere in that line. Where are you going to pause? Sometimes lines will have more than one caesura or diaresis. There's going to be word break somewhere. Some of them will be diareses. Some of them will be caesuras by definition. It's word break either in the middle of a metron, a caesura, or at the end of a metron, that's a diaresis. And if it's one where we usually expect it to be in a certain type of poetry, in a genre, in a certain meter, then it can be hard to dispute that the possibility of pausing between te and kai is right there and given to us by these native speakers. Euripides, Heraklidai, line 240. To shungeneste, kai to pru pelen kalos. If the rule is that we have to pause somewhere, if there has to be a caesura somewhere in this line, and it's right at the penthemimeral position, then we have excellent evidence. And these are just 3 examples from, I can't even count how many examples that happen at this exact same position with te kai in tragedy. Where else does this te kai get placed? Sometimes at the hempthomemeral position, that is after the seventh element. Also a frequent place where caesuras occur in the iambic trimeter line in tragedy. And I'm going to take all of those and put those in a Google Doc so you can look at them and see all the hundreds of examples of te kai and compare that with the rules of iambic trimeter and really confirm that, yeah, we should be considering pausing between te and kai. One more example. From comedy, the last of the four fully preserved playwrights from classical Athens, Aristophanes' Occurrences, line 1187, An histataite, kai xunantai drapetais. Now, there are a lot of metrical rules in iambic trimeter that tragedy observes very consistently, and comedy will not observe, like portions bridge and stuff like that. And yet, right there in even comedy, in iambic trimeter, the rule is preserved. We have the only logical place to pause in the line. We're in the place you could pause if you wanted to pause, and it's right where we'd expect it. So what does this mean? Whenever we're speaking ancient Greek, when we say te, make a conscious decision to pause. For example, pais megaste, kai andreos. Really make a long, even awkward pause there in order to make it stick in your mind. That's what I had to do, because I did this wrong for years until someone pointed this out to me. My colleague Vladimir Kurlia, he pointed this out to me a few years ago, and I'm like, oh, of course. We couldn't possibly say te kai andreos, because te is an enclitic. It's not a proclitic, it's an enclitic. It's simply impossible to start an utterance with an enclitic. It's a contradiction. So whenever you're reciting ancient Greek, you see a te followed by a kai, make a little pause there. It doesn't have to be big. Make sure the te is appropriately attached to the word before. Megaste, kai andreos. And now that phrase from before that I made kind of archaic, Andres, gynaikeste, like viri, feminaike. Let's make it more like classical Greek, which will say Andreste, kai gynaikes. And that little pause there, that's where it has to go, because te is really part of that word Andres. Andreste, kai gynaikes. And if you're preparing texts for students or even for any other purpose, considering putting more spaces where there should be pauses, because the punctuation we have is syntax-based and it's for a whole bunch of different purposes. Punctuation used to be for pauses and things like that back in antiquity, but add some spaces. Put an extra little space between the te and the kai. That helps remind us when we read, oh, yeah, I need to pause there, or at least consider pausing there. I don't have to pause. I can run through it, but I absolutely can't start the utterance with te kai. That's wrong. And I do that in the text for my video course for An Ephesian Tale Book 1. If you want to hear the language recited in a way that makes sense. Tutomen estin nagalma, kai epitoi nomismati, epito kermati, estin ekon tu agalmatos, kai tiesti to hieron. Malista eudoxon esti to hieron. Artemision. You get 10 hours of input in ancient Greek, 16 lessons, one for each of the chapters in Book 1 of An Ephesian Tale, which is this ridiculous, wonderful story that's a combination of Pirates of the Caribbean and Romeo and Juliet, something like that. It was a novel written in antiquity simply to entertain, and it is a great way to go from the beginner stage, especially if you've read something like Athenaze or one of those other readers and you're ready to get into literature. This video course takes you into the intermediate stage and gives you skills not only of reading, but of listening and even speaking too. And if you've done that course, or if you've already read Book 1 of An Ephesian Tale, then you're ready for Book 2 of An Ephesian Tale. There's still a few spots left in one of the sections, and you can check out the link to that in the description. So, thank you so much. Karin Humin Oida, and let's have a look at the birdies. Eroste. Gee, ciao, Blue Jay. Come get a peanut. Caire. Here it comes. Yeah, get a peanut.